So now I'd like to introduce Charu Kaushic. She's a professor of pathology and molecular medicine at McMaster University, where she studies the microenvironment of the female genital tract, the immune response there to viruses, particularly HIV and herpes virus, and their role in both the protection and susceptibility to infection. And she'll report from a meeting, as Michael had mentioned earlier, from vaccine researchers in December of last year. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Jonathan. So what Jonathan kindly didn't mention was this is not a new investigator or young investigator presentation, which I noted earlier, Michael. So, I'd like to thank the ACO office and CAHR for giving me this opportunity to make this presentation on behalf of the HIV vaccine researchers that met back in December. I'm trying to see whether I'll see better with or without glasses. I think we'll go without. What I've been asked to do today, so first of all, I have no conflict of interest, is to provide a summary of this Canadian HIV vaccine workshop that occurred in December, early December. And what we are doing today is reporting back to the larger HIV research community, sort of the proceedings of this meeting and the summary. And in doing so, I'd like to highlight some of the opportunities, challenges, and strengths of the Canadian HIV vaccine research community. So some people were involved in this from about a year ago when CIHR held an HIV vaccine workshop, which were basically consultations with three-pronged background or reasons to explore this area. They wanted to conduct an analysis of the current investment in vaccine research that CIHR has been making to identify strengths and gaps in vaccine research in Canadian research. They also wanted to do a comparative analysis of vaccine and other biomedical prevention strategies. And finally, we were asked to identify priority areas for future investments in HIV vaccine research in Canada. And I recall at that meeting, there was about 35 researchers who were involved in various aspects of HIV vaccine research, the general larger area in that. So coming out from that meeting, this was what was circulated as sort of the consensus that had come out from that discussion about a year ago, that the priority areas for future vaccine research, the Canadian researchers in consultation with some of the background research that had been done by CIHR, these areas were identified as the strengths and areas where Canadian researchers could make maximum contribution to the area of HIV vaccine research. So novel vaccine strategies, including vector, antigen, adjuvant, and immunomodulation. There was discussions around discovery phase to preclinical and animal trials to phase 1 trials. Mucosal immunity was identified as the second area where Canada could make the most impactful contribution in the area, and that encompassed areas around inflammation, resident cells in the mucosa, increase and decrease in target cell strategies that increase and decrease these target cells. And finally, the correlates of protection, which include cohort studies as a mean to determine these correlates. So among other discussions that day came out was that there's not many opportunities for the Canadian vaccine researchers to get together as a group and to discuss sort of their ongoing work and discuss potential areas of synergy and collaboration. So post this workshop back in last March, there were discussions with the ACO office whether that would be an appropriate forum to bring HIV researchers, vaccine researchers in particular, together to discuss sort of the ongoing efforts in Canadian HIV vaccine research. So this HIV vaccine workshop was organized in Ottawa in December. And I'm outlining the goals of the meeting. After much discussions of back and forth, these were sort of, we narrowed it down to the goals of this meeting would be to provide a forum for the Canadian HIV vaccine investigators to share their successes and accomplishments, to explore possibilities for future collaboration between CHVI teams and on investigators, to identify international opportunities to build on Canadian achievements, identify research or gaps in research funding, and discuss requirements that would be necessary for maintaining the momentum under CHVI. And finally, the next steps to encourage continued support for HIV vaccine and research in Canada, since at that time it was pretty imminent that the CHVI funding, which is the envelope from which these vaccine-focused initiatives had been funded for the last 10 years, was coming to an end. So the workshop was, emanated from this meeting a year ago, and many of the people who helped organize the workshop were people who were present at that meeting. The ACO office coordinated the meeting, and Mike and I were asked to chair the meeting. And we had help from a number of people who are well-known in the HIV vaccine research community, and we had about 22 presenters at this meeting. And the meeting was well attended by government officials, including CIHR and PHAC representatives. This is just the sort of summary outline. I don't have time to give you all the details of what was presented at the meetings, but I just wanted to highlight that the meeting came together pretty well, and it actually coincided well with the timing of the funding calls that had come out for IAVI, CIHR collaboration, as well as the biomedical clinical innovative funds. So we had international and national leaders who are experts in vaccine research talk to the group about sort of what is the international positioning of HIV vaccine research currently. 22 CHVI funded researchers made presentations on funding that had been given and the progress they had made with that funding in their specific research projects. This included large team grants, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation mucosal team grants, other CHVI-funded projects, and other HIV vaccine-related projects that were not funded through CHVI. CIHR kindly provided an overview of the federal HIV vaccine funding initiatives, and as I mentioned, there were at that time CIHR IAVI initiative as well as the Biomedical Clinical Innovative Research Grant that was there. So that was discussed, and then the panel discussed, there was a panel discussion on international opportunities for collaboration, and I'll expand on this a little bit in the next couple of slides. Finally, there was a roundtable of future directions for Canadian HIV vaccine research, and there was a pretty good focus on trying to find some concrete outcomes from this meeting so that we could have something to show for having gotten together as a group of researchers. The international and national talks that were there in terms of figuring out the positioning that Canadian researchers should be taking in the context of global HIV vaccine initiatives. Dr. Gary Cobinger, who is well known in the Canadian HIV vaccine and Canadian vaccine community, talked about the success of the VSV Ebola virus vaccine and how some of these lessons learned from this Ebola virus vaccine success could be applied to a potent HIV vaccine. And that fit well with the theme of the VSV IAVI initiative that was ongoing at that time, and the call was out for some large team grants to be put in for that. Dr. Rabin Shattuck from Imperial College was invited because he was the head of the new European HIV vaccine initiative. And he talked about how European Union has managed to leverage a large sum of money by this collaborative approach, and that was sort of another discussion point of whether Canadian vaccine researchers could initiate something which is a bigger endeavor by leveraging from international sources. Dr. Chris Parks and Bill Schief, who are both from IAVI, talked about some of the IAVI-specific interests in vaccine and where IAVI is positioning itself in terms of HIV vaccine approaches. So Chris talked about the VSV HIV chimeric vaccine in the SHIV challenge protection model, which that's the specific RFA that they were looking for, to collaborate with Canadian researchers to improve their VSV vector. And Bill Schief talked about the, and he's the head of the HIV AIDS vaccine and immunogen discovery, and he talked about the rational immunogen design based on the specific germline B-cell receptors, including the sequential immunization that they're doing now. So the outcomes from the meeting, which we were quite focused on making sure that there was specific outcomes, there was an executive summary of the discussions that occurred at this meeting, and a consensus statement was put out, which was signed by about 29 researchers, HIV and HIV researchers and researchers supporting HIV research in Canada. And these were sent out to multiple government agencies and elected officials in early March to basically advocate for continuing HIV vaccine research in Canada. There's also a special issue of AIDS research and therapy, which summarizes or puts together a whole issue dedicated to Canadian HIV vaccine research. And this endeavor is thanks to Dr. Eric Arts, who is the editor for this journal. So that I know is in progress. I think most of the reviews have been submitted, and we're expecting that the issue will be out hopefully sometime in spring. So what I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about is the 4 key areas that emerged as a priority from this particular vaccine workshop. Funding, that's what researchers do. We ask for funding. And without doubt, that was something that came up in many different aspects of the constraints that were on HIV vaccine community were particularly felt in the last 3 or 4 years because of the changes in CIHR funding models, resulting in urgently needed increase in funding for HIV vaccine research, and in particular, and in general for CIHR to get more funding from the federal government. What was discussed more particularly was whether we could do meaningful participation from the international consortia to leverage some funding and focus more on strategic translational projects, which with continued funding for basic research as well as trainee research, which is no longer there as a specific initiative from the federal government. There was quite a bit of discussion on the infrastructure needs for the vaccine community, particularly because vaccine research requires NHP models, humanized mouse models, as well as manufacturing processes and facilities for these kind of translational projects. So that was discussed as a possible source that would be useful for the Canadian HIV vaccine community. Sustaining research capacity, so 10 years of CHVI funding allowed for many international projects, large team grants that have done substantial amount of work, and the means to continue to support, because this is investment from the government funding, not only for the teams, but it's an investment for the government. Whether there would be any long-term mechanism to support the continued partnership and building this research capacity and maintaining it. And finally, advocacy. The fact that we as HIV researchers need to advocate for ourselves, and HIV research community in general that has been very good in advocating in terms of continuing specific envelopes for HIV vaccine, which fits well with the theme of this meeting. We are not done yet. So we still need more funding to continue these initiatives that are there. So I'll spend last couple of minutes just basically focusing on some of these international collaborations, which are an opportunity. So as I said, Dr. Robin Shattuck gave an overview of the European AIDS Vaccine Initiative. I won't get into the detail of it. Their website is very informative. And they have managed to pull together with 39 partners about 45 million euros to design this specific strategy for European Union to work on an HIV vaccine. And this includes everything from discovery phase to actually doing clinical trials. As I mentioned, there is already in the works a CIHR IAVI research partnership which focuses on very specific VSV vector, which is the platform that IAVI is using for their vaccine, and this is an ongoing opportunity. The IAVI people are extremely enthusiastic about Canadian researchers and wanting to partner with them, so this is another opportunity. This call is over, but I think IAVI in general is quite interested in Canadian contributions to this area. And finally, in case many of you don't know that, the CHVI Achievements report just came out a few days ago. This is the website for it, and I'm just summarizing sort of the list of their achievements that they highlighted in terms of what had been achieved with the 10 years of CHVI funding, including collaborations, knowledge sharing, building capacity in low and middle income countries, and a focus on preparing both low and middle income countries and Canadian partners to prepare for vaccine trials, as well as a big component of preventing mother-to-child transmission. And finally, they point out towards the future of where Canadian HIV vaccine research focus would be, and they point out at 3 main areas of interest for not only for CIHR and Government of Canada, but for international partners as well, where the focus has shifted to a comprehensive approach to prevention, investigating early treatment and achieving functional cure, as well as exploring cross-cutting themes such as mucosal immunology of understanding HIV infection. So basically, the takeaway message is that vaccines have to be explored in the context of the larger HIV prevention toolkit, which includes both PrEP, PEP, male circumcision, microbicides, and as many of you who might have attended HIV R4P, that's also a move that NIH and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is focusing on to include this as a bigger toolkit so that there's cross-fertilization between these different areas of HIV prevention. And I'll finally end with this slide because just to drive home the point that no matter how you look at the numbers, we know that the HIV new infection rates are plateauing, and this is a slide from IAVI which shows that no matter which model from UNAIDS you look at in terms of 90-90-90, whether it's the current rate, whether it's a 50% enhanced efficiency rate, or whether it's what they're really targeting for, which is 90-90-90, adding HIV vaccine into that equation will definitely bring a faster end to this epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charu. That was a great summary. Unfortunately, we're running a little behind. We don't have time for questions, but I'm